Okay, my name is Jeff Barczewski, and I'm here to talk today about Masterview, the evolution of a WYSIWYG template engine. And I was the Masterview project founder, and I have a company called Inspired Horizons, which does training and mentoring. What I thought would be good to talk about today is a little bit of the background of why we created the project, just kind of the thought process we went through, some of the goals that we had for the project, give you a demonstration of how things work. So a lot of you probably haven't seen that, and I can talk through exactly how Masterview works. So I'll give you a little bit of a demo. Then we will also talk about the evolution of how it started out and how we grew the project. And I think a lot of the, maybe some of the lessons learned and that we went through might be applicable to a lot of your projects. And then finally we can finish off with some future directions on where we're going to take the project. So just to back up, I'm a system architect for RGA in St. Louis, Missouri. Primarily there we build a tele-underwriting application in Java. I went to a No Fluff Just Stuff conference, Java conference in February of 2005, wanting to learn about the newest Java things, and came out wanting to learn Ruby. So that was pretty cool. And my life has changed ever since. So basically, at that point in my life, I'd been doing this for 18 years, and I was pretty much tired of everything. I mean, Java, we were doing struts and web app and all that, but it was boring. It was too complicated. It takes a lot to make screen changes. And it just was no fun. And I got tired of trying to look at every time I looked at new technology for Java, I didn't like what I saw. It was too complicated. I just lost interest in it. So went to the No Fluff Just Stuff, maybe thinking maybe I'd see something good. Heard Dave Thomas talk, and he's a good speaker, so he kind of shed some light on things. Then I went to see Bruce Tate's talk on Beyond Java, and he pointed out that the reason that some of these projects, the Java projects, were so well attended at the conference was because Java was too hard. The traditional things that we were doing was too hard. EJBs and all that were too difficult. And that Spring and some of these other lighter weight things were trying to be built to as a stopgap for that. And so how do you go beyond that? Well, Ruby was the next thing on the radar, as well as Rails. And then he started talking about productivity gains and all that, and I said, oh, yeah. But he said 10 times productivity, and I said, wow, well, if it is that much, then it is worth me taking a look at. If it was just a little bit, in productivity, then why would I want to learn a new language or do anything else? But 10 times was worth me trying to take a look at it. So I started to look at it. I started going to the St. Louis Ruby user group. They just started up like the month before. And so I got in at the ground level there, and it was, it was fun to see what people could do with Ruby. And basically, I was excited again. I was excited to learn and do coding, and I had been, pretty much dead for a while. And so this was kind of a new life for me, and so I was excited about that. So then I started looking at. I needed a way to develop WYSIWYG templates for websites. But I wanted to use Rails as my back end. And after reading about how Rails, the philosophers and all that, the architects for that, David Hannemeyer Hansen and that, they really didn't have anything like that, nor did they really think they needed a template engine, because they felt that what Rails did was the best. And so I said, okay, well, I'll try that. So I started my first few projects using that and worked that way. And it felt a little lacking. I mean, it felt like taking a step back because they're using primarily like ERB, RHTML, which is, the old days of ASP or JSP. I mean, that's what it looks like. It's, you're embedding, Ruby code in the middle of HTML, and then on top of that, they were breaking things out into different files so they could be more dry. And so I was like, wow, that's, I think we could do a little better with that. So I started to look at the options and just to see if there was anything else out there. And obviously Ruby had lots of WYSIWYG engines that were out there for just doing with pure Ruby. And so I'll talk about a few of those, but found out that they didn't offer what I needed, and I looked at trying to extend them and didn't really see that I could extend them either in an easy way. So decided that maybe I need to look at my own project. So started to think about what I wanted to do, write down my goals, and then take it to the St. Louis Ruby user group and see what they thought. So my big push to learn Ruby and Rails started back in March 2005. I really loved the productivity of Rails, though. I was floored by how quickly I could do things. So I felt we could do better with the Vue. So some of the goals that I had were I wanted this to be WYSIWYG capable, so that you could take an editor like NVU, an open source editor, and move stuff around on the screen. Or you could use Dreamweaver. A lot of the designers that we have like to do that. The non-developers, they love to just move stuff around the screen or use their something they're familiar with to do things. And sometimes they don't like to understand what that code is in the middle. So especially if there's loops or blocks, they got to be careful to move that with. If they're moving something around, they need to move that other stuff that's surrounding it with it. So there's some things they got to learn if they're going to do that, or they just need to have something that's seamless to them. We were looking to keep it simple. We didn't want to make something harder. I wanted to, the productivity gains is what I was getting out of Rails, and I didn't want to take a step back. I wanted it to be fast and not a lot of extra steps to get this thing going. I also wanted it dry. I wanted to take advantage of reusing as many things as possible. I wanted Rails layouts, partials, and helpers. The layouts is the surrounding header footer type thing, and partials is a reused piece inside the page, and then the helpers provided a lot of functionality wrapped up in a function call to render. So I really liked what they had. I just wanted to take advantage of that, but trying to force that into one of the existing libraries wasn't going to be easy. I didn't want extra complexity. The other thing that I found out when I started looking at libraries was that a lot of them, they really went to that X degree of trying to separate the view from the code and the presentation and keep that all separate. And so then they would introduce a third layer in the middle there where they would put the logic of how the view actually hooked things up. And I didn't really care for that too much. I mean, I can see the benefits of that for some uses, but to me, if I added something over here, now I have to add it in the middle, and then, so I've got a lot more extra steps, and I was trying to get away from that, and we were trying to get simpler. So I kind of wanted something in the middle there, compromise. And I also didn't want to have to create, like with Amrita, one of the more popular Ruby templating libraries, you'd have to create objects in the form of what you're trying to render, and then it can easily hook them up. But if you change the structure or the order or move things around, then Amrita the objects need to be changed. And so in a lot of cases. So that was like, I don't want to do that. That's obviously one of the key things. I want people to change it as much as they want. And so that was a key concern. I wanted some kind of scaffolding. One of the neat things about Rails was the quick wow factor when you could get something up with scaffolding and be ready to go. And not only the wow factor, but just the fact that for some apps, that's all you needed. I mean, for some CRUD type apps or admin apps, you just need to manage the data, need to add data, edit, delete, and so that's it. So I wanted something that was a lot closer to being usable and looked nice than what Rails was providing originally. I wanted less number of files. As I mentioned before, the Rails had split things into different files, and so if you were trying to apply some look and feel to a site, you might go to this one file and then find out, no, that's not where I need to go. Now I need to go to the layout. Now I need to go to the partial. And you're jumping around to try and figure out where you need to go. And eventually you kind of get the hang of it, but sometimes it's kind of hard if things cross over borders and things that you got to put something here and here and here, and you're just jumping back and forth. So some of the tools help make that easier, but it's still a hassle. And the final thing that I wanted was I wanted to be able to preview this in the browser. So I wanted you to be able to take these templates and take them to your boss, take them to somebody in legal or whoever in the department that needs to sign off on things, let them use the app in a prototype kind of mode, even without Rails running or any kind of code, and then maybe make changes if they wanted to, if they needed to change the verbiage on the screen or whatever, if they needed to change the style, make the colors look right, kind of all those things, and then have that be usable back in the app, and not, so you can continue to make these changes as you went. So even as you're developing and you've got existing code, you could still continue to make changes to the prototype and have that come back into the system. Let's see. Okay, so what did I consider? Of course, when you start out a new project, you don't want to just build your own because you can, and I think Gregory was talking about that first and Ara, I think, talked about going to Google first and see if there's anything out there that does what you want. So I did that. I tried to look around. I asked questions. I talked to Jameis on email and talked about, what other things are out there. In particular, I was looking at doing something componentized at the time. So I was kind of looking at doing, components. And Jameis pointed me at Quartz. I was already looking at Amarita 2. I looked at Page Template. I tried to look at all the ones that I could. All the things I could find that looked like they had, some semblance of templating and were fairly active projects. I was taking a look at them. I looked at Iowa and Liquid. I looked at some of the other non-Ruby frameworks, like WebObjects. I was coming from a Java world, so I was a little bit familiar with what JSF was bringing to the table. I didn't really want the complexity it had, but there were some neat ideas out of there. PHP, Zoptal, and Tapestry. So I considered a lot of those. Really went down. Amarita seemed to be the closest thing to meet my goals. But when I got into trying to figure out how we'd make the changes, it really wasn't going to be fit. Plus the fact that, like I said, when you would move stuff around, the layout it wouldn't hold together. So we dismissed that, and there really wasn't anything else that was a real front winner as far as something I could leverage. So then I went to decide to create my own project, and or at least bounce it off the Ruby user group, the St. Louis group, and see what they thought, see if it had merit or if I was missing something obvious. One thing I did like about was the simplicity of Rails, but they didn't have didn't have components, and so I wanted some of the features of components. I didn't necessarily need a full component system, but I was looking for at least some of the features. Let's see, realize that. Then it dawned on me that what I could do to start out with was to create a thin layer over ERB. Rails was using ERB for underneath the covers, and so I said, well, what could I create something that would generate ERB, and then everything else would work like it did before in Rails? And turned out that was an easy, fairly easy thing to do. So thought through that process a little bit, and then took it to the Ruby user group and decided to see what they thought. Once I explained it to them, like I did for you, they pretty much got it. They knew, they've been approached with projects before that needed to have a certain look and feel, so that's always a difficult thing. A lot of times in client work, I'll be given a prototype of HTML, or they'll have somebody create a prototype in HTML and they'll say, here, build this, make it real. And so a lot of times you'll have that starting look that you need to hit, and so they could clearly see how this would be useful, to take. One of the members in our user group thought, Kyle Cortez mentioned that, well, what would be great though is if you could make this available to me to extend. So if I could make my own directives, my own tags, then then I'll be able to create powerful things that I use myself in my projects, and then add that in, and reuse that, and have the whole team take advantage of code and not have to duplicate code and all that. So the idea of kind of building making those customizable, making this open, that was really cool. And I also thought that the idea of the community might drive it in a whole different direction. There might be a whole bunch of users that need to do financial type directives or their statistical directives or whatever. I mean, there might be a whole groups of people that have needs that I don't even anticipate. So if I could open this up and make it easy to plug in new things and not just a static language that's real tight, then I could really that might be a useful thing for it to expand and create some good community. So I like that idea. So we took away that idea, and we would open it up to the community. So then I thought, now I just give you a quick demo so you kind of understand what we're dealing with, and then I can go forward with some of the evolution and lessons learned. So going to try and do a demo here, so we'll see if hopefully everything will hold together. So just to compare and contrast, so if I've got a simple single table database here, and if I were to create a new Rails app and then scaffold that, I'll show you what that looks like, and then I'll turn around and do this with Masterview. Oh, and I forgot to mention. Even though I'm talking about this in terms of Rails, Masterview is a Ruby template engine, and there's nothing that requires Rails about it. We have a lot of hooks to make using it in Rails great, because that's where I was using it. Just like Gregory was saying, you choose where you're going to use it, and you focus on those things, and that's where I'm using it. So that's where the meat of the stuff is there. But there's nothing that requires Rails. And in fact, all of our tests run without Rails running, just fires up Ruby and they run. So, with that said, it's going to be used for Ruby as well. It's just not as much work being put into that currently. But as people have needs, then we can accommodate that. The other thing I was going to mention is there's a lot of other neat projects like Nitro and also MERB, which is Mongrel plus ERB. And that is proving to be, pretty nice little platform too. It's very fast, lightweight, a little lighter weight than Rails. And so I see no problem with hooking those things up as well. So there's obviously other ways we can hook this, but for my purposes, I was interested in Rails, so that's where the focus was most. Okay, so what I'm going to do is generate a for the product table. Sure when I scrolled off the screen there. Okay. And so simply, in Rails, if you've ever used it, there's a simple way to generate a scaffold and then run that. And this is just a simple, store app. Let's see. It's a great thing about live demos, huh? Oh, that's right. Yeah, no. I think since if I specify the generate. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot. I didn't get the database hooked up, so I couldn't find anything. All right. Yeah. It's real original. There, okay. I was scrolling up the screen, so I hope you guys can still see that somewhat. But, all right. Boy, I keep touching the touchpad there. Okay, so I need to go into config. Yeah, and I've got a real strong password, and I bet a lot of people don't even know that you can change the password because that's what they all use. So, all right. Okay. All right. Let's see if this does any better. Oh, I see. I probably didn't generate. So. All right. Let's see if this gives us anything. All right, so now, and I specified singular store. That's one of the interesting things about Rails, though, is, and I got some data in here, not a whole lot, but this is basically your, store with name, description, cost, and price. Not a big deal. You got paging going on here. you have your show, edit. You can edit something. It'll tell you that it edited it, and create a new product, and then you got to delete. And their delete just does a pop-up, and then you click OK, and it deletes something. So that's your standard, Rails app. Okay, so to change over and to contrast that with a Masterview, Masterview is installed either as a plugin or as a gem. If you install it as a gem, that's the preferred. That's the preferred way for me is to use the gem, just so I can maintain all the. If there's any other dependencies and things like that, then I like the gem framework to do that. But to still get it to work and to fire up in Rails, I still need to create a little stub in there as a plugin. So anyway. All right, so if we create another app here, and this time we'll take advantage of all right. This time I will edit the database. All right, and to basically, so I've got Masterview installed, and if you, as a gem right now, so if you'll see that I got several versions, but the latest version's out there. And then to actually make something so it hooks into Rails at this point, because right now it's as a gem, but Rails doesn't know anything about it. So to make it something that'll hook together, I actually have just a small generator that actually creates a small plugin. Most of the stuff is still in the gem, so you're still taking advantage of not duplicating code, but it's. Oh, let's see. Okay, so basically created a few little hooks, not a whole lot of code here. Most of this is still in the gem, or you could do a script plugin install and get things that way. So now at this point, I can. You'd only have to do this once, and for the whole project, and then after that, then you can scaffold as many other things as you need. So it's very similar to the other thing, same syntax. Okay, and this time you'll see that we created 5 HTML files rather than the original one that had a bunch of RHTML files. So these are the Masterview files, and they're in a similar location. They're under the app views and all that. So a similar location to where you'd expect before. And if we pull one of those up, we can actually browse those just as off the file system. Okay, and so this is a generic scaffold that was generated, and you can see I got a little bit of style going on. I got some dummy text on here because this is just a static page, and I just put in the product name, the model and the field name and all that. And you've got your standard things here. This is where if there was any kind of message, it would show up. So you've got a lot of the basic stuff. I've got some simple style. It's a very simple CSS, and it's isolated, so you can make it like 4 colors. You can change it to whatever you want. And I got the three column layout kind of set up, so you can take advantage of that. I got the sidebar here for your menus. And then so this is, to make it useful as a prototype, I also wired up some JavaScript to when you're just using this in browser mode, in preview mode, that the JavaScript kind of takes over and makes it look like it's real. So if you click over here to create new product, we're not actually hitting Rails or anything. It's just switching to the other HTML, and then the same thing with when it's submitting. It actually is going to submit and then go back to the list view. So I'm actually just kind of hard coding some things together, just to give you an idea of what the flow will be like. Same thing in my destroy. I use the post back, so actually just show you what you're going to get before you delete, and then if you delete, then it goes back. So you kind of get the feel of what it's going to look like, and you could add more dummy data in here or whatever, and be able to start using this as a prototype. So now let's fire it up in Rails and see what we get. Oh, one more thing I'm going to make. We use RexML the parser to parse the XHTML, but sometimes people have HTML that's not XHTML compliant. Doesn't have all the close tags, or sometimes the editors don't do that, or sometimes you just mess up and you forget a tag or whatever. Well, that'll create invalid XML, and that's hard. The parser can't deal with that. So I ran into that because the one product I was using, NVU, was even in some cases it was messing up the code and creating that sloppy HTML too. So we looked around and found that we could use Tidy, which is another project out there, and there's a Ruby binding for it, to clean up the code. So no matter what happened and what we messed up, Tidy could fix it up and get us going again. So I'm just going to turn that on, and because sometimes NVU has some issues with what it does. So we've got some settings and stuff for Masterview that we generate by default there. They're mostly commented out, but you can go in and change whatever you need. In my case, there's a Tidy location down here. I need a better way to be able to configure this, but it's different based on Unix versus Windows, and I really just couldn't find a good way to find the path. And they leave it as a thing that you have to configure in the Tidy library. So I need to look into that more if I can figure out how to do that better. But what we have the ability to do in Masterview is to go ahead and do additional filtering processing on the files before we actually load them in. So I'm turning on Tidy. I'm going to run through Tidy. I've also got the ability to do other things. We're doing an escape thing, so that if you had some of that old RHTML %equal stuff embedded in there, again, that's not good HTML either, or good XML either. So we escape that out so that it would be valid, and then we turn it around and can render it later. So we ended up accommodating both those scenarios. So I just turned those settings on so that we could see that. In case the thing messes up something, it'll still work. Let me just start up. Okay. Okay, so this time we can see that we're loading up some additional Masterview. We'll get some debug information going on here that Masterview is being invoked, and some of the features of Masterview you can turn on and off how it loads. So for debugging purposes, it was pretty useful to show some of that. So I went ahead and showed that at the screen by default. And it's all changeable in the log. But okay, so now this is our original screen. So now if we go back and see what the live Masterview screen looks like, okay, so it looks a lot like what we had in our prototype, except now we've got the data in it that we had before. And, we've got the paging and all that we can, do. Editing. Your normal code. So just real quickly, we were able to, scaffold something and boom, get something that's, fairly decent. And if you had an existing style sheet you like, it's a real simple change. In fact, I got a config parameter you can specify that, and you would be ready to go. I mean, you're done. So if this is all you need, you do a basic CRUD app, this might get you pretty close to what you need. I won't say it's 100% production ready, but it's worked for me, and I haven't needed to change very much usually. So the next thing I wanted to show. Okay, so now we've got this thing. We were talking about WYSIWYG editing. So what the heck, I don't know if you guys, how many of you used NVU or not, but it's the old Mozilla Composer, and they named it NVU. I don't remember why, but they took the open source Mozilla and Composer and added some stuff to it and created NVU. And so it's an open source project, and it does some neat things. It uses the browser for its renderer, so you know that you're going to get something pretty close to what you're going to see, and that's one thing I like. I like the fact that it's open source too. So, all right, so it's going to just go in here and go into so this pretty much looks like what we had before, and now we can actually just go in here and say I don't remember how to change file field lengths and stuff. I can just do that with a property here. I can see what I'm going to get immediately as I'm doing it. I can make some of these shorter. So and you also have your full CSS capabilities in here. You can go up there and edit the CSS, and it gives you dialog boxes to how to drive that. And so anyway, to change something, all we have to do is save it, and then we didn't even actually exit out of our app or anything. And just like Rails does normally, it should pick up the changes. And so now we've got a longer top and a different size screens down here. The other thing that you didn't see there was we edited only one file. There was 5 files: create, list, new, edit, and delete or destroy. And but both the create and the edit, the new and the create, both got updated. Well, that's because we are sharing partials. So I mentioned before that I wanted things to be dry. So even though you have to show everything in each file, there's some things that are shared across and imported from one to the other. So there is only one place that you need to edit the field forms. There's only one place you need to edit the list forms, and there's only one place you need to edit the header and footer. So those things they're imported into the other views. Okay, so anyway, both the create, the new and the edit are all updated now just by saving that. So you don't have to do anything special. In development mode, it just picks it right back up just like Rails does. If we were in production mode, things get cached and just like in Rails. So we take advantage of all the same kinds of optimizations. If we open up like our list view, that's where our layout's contained, and we can go in here and edit this. We didn't. We can, change that, and then up here at the top, change that. And then, some of the more interesting things to do would be to turn on, to move things around, visually. So that's another thing that's kind of hard to see with CSS. You don't know what you're going to get. So let's just make this thing movable. And then switch back to our preview mode here. And now, NVU decided to go away. Let's try that again. Not sure why my layout is not looking very good here, but let's just save it and see what happens. It might be overlapped with something, but you get the idea of what we're trying to go for. Okay, so basically, I've moved that position down. I guess I grabbed too much. I was only supposed to grab the header thing, and I grabbed too many things. But we actually changed that. I forgot to edit this down here, but we changed it in one, and then now all of the pages have the changes that we just made because we're using a repeated layout across all of them. So that's taken care of there. The other thing though is that if we bring up NVU, though, we'll see that, not everything has the updates yet. So up here we didn't have the changes. So I came across that. It's like, okay, well, originally I started out creating this all in one file. So it was completely dry. There was only one file for all 5 pages. But as we got into it, the users and the teams wanted to be able to have different things, that people would work on different things at a time. They didn't want to be stepping on that one file. So then we got the idea, okay, well, let's at least split out the functions, and then we'll import things back and forth as we need to. So that's kind of what we're doing here. One file contains the master copy of pieces, and then the other one's imported in. And so these didn't actually get updated yet. So what we created an admin screen in Masterview so that we could update things through the web browser or with command line tools. So both, we have the opportunity to do both. And this is only going to show up by default, only show up on a local host, and there's configurable security, or even you can turn it off altogether. But you can see what we got here is the list view is actually controlling the layout and the partial for messages, the partial for that list iterating on the products, and then we've got the other partials and things being shared here. And you can see if there's a problem with the files or whatever, it'll show up here. We can see that in this case we've got some imports that are outdated. We can individually rebuild one of them, or we can click rebuild all, and then it will basically put those all together so that they've all got current code. So now when people go in with NVU and edit something, they see all of the same stuff. So this might also be useful to maintain sites. There are other tools out there to maintain static websites, but it just kind of came as a side effect that we can do that as well with pieces of code. So anyway, that's that. And, then back in the admin tool, we added a few other features that are kind of interesting. You can copy an existing template to create a shell for another one with all the things already set up. You can do an interactive rendering here where you can type your own text here, and it actually shows what it's going to render down here. So you've got some things to help you learn how that works. So let me see how I'm doing on time. A little behind, but I think we'll be all right. So how it works? Well, I mentioned it's a RexML listener. We generate one or more ERB files. So each template might have to generate might have to generate many files. A layout might have to generate some partials, but it's all just syntactically set up in there. And the nice thing is that you don't have to bounce back and forth between too many files. A lot of times they're all right there in that one file. So there is potential of some things being different files, but for the most part, we tried to make it so you could work in one file and not have to not know where to have a problem where know where to go. The directives are just simple HTML attributes, so they don't mess up the display and they don't mess up the XML compatibility. We've got an API to provide access to the data, so I tried to make it easy. I didn't want people to have to learn RexML because you got to learn a lot of stuff to be able to use it. So we tried to wrap that up and make it easy. And these directives are just simple Ruby classes, and we wrap all the information up around the parents and the children and the attributes and all those things, and give that to them with a nice API that they can actually use. And then they can control their children, and we can take into account nesting and other types of interesting things. To stay dry, we wanted to. Some templates just say, okay, I'm just going to render my piece. I'm not going to worry about the rest of it. Well, that only works a little bit because you can't really see what your pages are going to look like until the whole thing is put together. And especially if there's a style that depends on this being inside this div, this being inside this div, that's why we went with the approach of having the full thing rendered and just trying to keep that up to date. So that's why we went with that. But we still wanted to be dry, so that's the key thing too. We didn't want to have a lot of copied code that you have to maintain. Another thing that's neat is to have this dummy data so that you can actually have a lot of data in your prototype and demonstrate that to your boss or whatever, even before you build the app. And that's the other way that you can use Masterview. You don't have to do the scaffolding thing. You can start out with a straight HTML prototype somebody gave you, and then you just add in some templates, some directives into the HTML, make it live. And then that same prototype can still be tweaked by your designer. So a lot of times in the teams that I've been on, there's different people that do design versus development. And I mean, that might not be the case in your company. But even so, I also don't prefer to do it by hand. I like to use a tool like MVU to do it. So even if I'm going to do it, I'd rather use something that can work for me to do that. But in the cases where it's separate people, then they can use their favorite tool to edit, Dreamweaver or whatever it is, and maintain things. And they can change things right up to the last minute. So you can be working on your code, they can be changing things around, and changing styles and language and all that, and then slap it back in, and if they haven't messed up the directives, then everything's going to just work like it did before. So, and for the most part, that usually works, because they don't usually go into the code and tweak anything inside of it. They usually are worried about positioning and text and all that. So, anyway, let's see. Okay, so the other thing that's neat about this is Rails had a lot of neat helpers that would create text boxes and widgets, date widgets and things like that. So we want to take advantage of that. Plus, people plug in stuff to Rails that also enhance that and change how that works. And so if we did our own thing and didn't use helpers, then we wouldn't be leveraging everything that's available to Rails. So we decided to go ahead and make some helpers or some directives that would create the helpers. So they actually take our code and change it into the appropriate helper, passing all the right stuff in, and so you get all the look and feel that you just created, but it's actually being generated into the helpers properly. And so then you act just like a regular a Rails app. The directives are classes, and they're dynamically loaded based on what's in the path and what you configure. And we've got a generator for the plugin, and we've got a generator for the scaffold, and then there's a plugin engine. The other thing we're going to be working on is a REST version, so that you can do REST scaffolding. So just quickly mention how this actually works. If you can see up on the left is actually a Masterview template, and then the right is some of the files that are being generated. So this is the new template, and it's actually generating a layout, and then a wrapper, and then a form partial. So those are the things that are being created there, and some of the tags are the things that are driving the fact that it's going to create, a new file or whatever. And in this case, like this text field here, we're saying we're going to pull up the product name. So we're going to be creating a text helper of product name, and we're going to be pulling the rest of the WYSIWYG from the input control. So the fact that we've specified size of 20 here ended up showing up in our helper here. So we're actually pulling a lot of all the WYSIWYG functionality and creating the appropriate helper with that all wrapped up. So that's kind of one of the interesting things of that. Okay, so how did this evolve? I think this will be interesting to some other projects too. We put together the basics to prove the concept, just to see if it was feasible. Could we even do this, and would it be too hard, or is it going to work pretty well? That worked pretty well, pretty easily. To just do the ERB generator, that wasn't too hard. So then we started adding tests and began to get into a lot of TDD. So I'd been exposed to TDD before, but I hadn't really used it a lot in my past projects. My employers never wanted to start out that way, and usually had a lot of legacy code when I get there, and so. But this, to do an open source project, you got to have tests. So we said, okay, let's get into this and start creating some tests. And I loved it. I got sold on it real quickly, how neat it was and how easy it was to refactor. So we started adding a lot of tests around things. I still got a lot more I want to do, but I feel 100% better on how it is from when it first started. First version we created, like I said, generated a single file. But that turned out to be, not workable for teams. People kept stepping on each other, and so then from the user feedback, then we said, okay, we need to do something more. We need to go to multiple files, and so then we went to the one per file per function kind of methodology. We create a temperature view, and then we use imports to keep things dry. So next thing, we needed to process to synchronize. So we needed a way. When we started doing that, then we had problems with things being out of date. And of course, you want to be able to see everything in each page when they're editing it, so it looks just right. So we created a console command line version that you could do that, so you can update, to synchronize. Or I showed you that web admin version where you can just click a link and it updates things. We also ran into tidy, needing tidy, because NVU was generating some bad code, bad HTML, or bad XHTML. So we learned that we could use tidy to fix that up. And so no matter if you made a mistake or if your editor did, whatever, it didn't make any difference. We could instantly clean it up. So then all of a sudden we got Deb Lewis found me on the net, and I had just created my Ruby Forge project not too much earlier than that, and she was looking for the exact same thing. So she lives out in California, and I actually haven't even met her yet. I've done everything via email, so it's pretty neat to have these communities where you don't even know people. I'm looking forward to meeting her at the RailsConf, but she was gonna. I asked her to come today too, but she's skiing in a Masters tournament or something, so she couldn't be here. But she joined the project, and luckily, one of her strengths is documentation. So I suck at documentation. She came in and just started creating documentation left and right. She had some great ideas on how to change the configuration, and she implemented that. And it was just great. I mean, if you've ever started out a project when you're the one doing everything, it's really slow and kind of have to keep motivating yourself to do this and all that. And but then when somebody joins in and starts helping, then it just really starts to take off, and it's exciting. So we grew into a team and started creating more things. I could bounce ideas off of her, and it really was it's terrific. And so to this day, we're still continuing to work on Masterview together. She became my second committer. So I had to learn a lot about setting up projects for Ruby Forge and all that, because as a new person doing open source and that. So I had to pick a license too. I wasn't sure what to do. So Gregory talked about that earlier. I think we ended up with Ruby license and MIT license is what I mentioned on Ruby Forge. So I'm going to go back and double check if I'm using the right one or not. But okay, is that because of that? Because of that? Okay. So I think maybe we should be covered then. So hopefully. But there's a lot of stuff to learn. So it's really good when people can simplify it for you and just tell you what the main differences is. I didn't certainly want to write my own. So one thing we didn't like initially is that we were generating ERB. So then we were creating RHTML files when actually it would run. When Rails would fire up, we'd actually create RHTML files as well. So now we had like the template files and then all the RHTML files, and they happen to be either in the same place or pretty close. And that was just ugly, because I said, people are going to go in here and edit this, and then when they change the template, it's going to override it, and so it's going to be a big mess. So I said, okay, well, let's come up with an option so we can just do this behind the scenes and not generate those files. So then we looked at how we could do that, and decided also that we needed a common way to do our I/O. Tons of the stuff we were doing, we were opening files here and there, left and right, and make sure you close them consistently. And obviously Ruby makes that easier, but there was still a lot of things I was doing. I was running tidy on things. I was escaping some things. I was wanting to log this and that. And so I also wanted to be able to run things and test, and I didn't want to use files. So I wanted to have things come out of strings and just pass those into the test. And then we could also envision, I didn't need it yet, but you can envision the ability to create your templates in database and maintain them that way. So that a lot of times in a CMS system, you'll have all your data in the database, but then you got these layouts and things on the file system, and you don't usually like people writing to your file system on a production server. So database is a good option for those kinds of things and to keep things backed up and all that. So we thought about that and said, okay, let's abstract that I/O into a library, a simple library, not anything complicated, and build on that. So we abstracted that. That made testing a breeze. I mean, we didn't have to create any files. And we set the things up for database driven. We didn't really actually implement that. We didn't need it, so we didn't implement it. Filters, filters easily apply. That was another thing that was kind of neat. Once we had this framework in place, we could easily have people configure in filters. So we could actually do escaping, we could do tidy, we can do caching, we could do logging. We could actually, if you didn't specify any files to generate, we could put in a default so that we could automatically generate something. Usually if you're going to create a template, you want to generate something. So we could put all these little filters in, and we can add more real easily without having to touch much code. You could do encryption, compression, whatever. I mean, there's the list is endless on those kinds of things. Most of the So we met most of the functional goals, but when I looked at it and went back to the goal about making it community driven, the API sucked. I mean, it was just, I've simplified things as much as I could, but it was just a mess, especially since I didn't anticipate some things, and it grew and grew and grew, and the feature set grew. It didn't, come out as clean as it could have. So we said, okay, we got everything working. Let's do a round 2 at it. So I sat down with Deb and we talked about things, over email and that, and decided that, hey, let's see if we can simplify this with a DSL. We heard a lot about DSLs cleaning things up, so let's create a little DSL and see if that would simplify things. So sure enough, we were able to kind of mock up what we wanted, what would be nice, and found that there was a lot of, similarity between the directives so far. And so we were able to clean that up, get rid of some of the bloat, and really make things simple. The other thing that I hated is that the API, you needed to know too much knowledge about how to use it, which is the bad design. Because a user, coming in fresh in the project is going to not know everything I do, and so then they're not going to call in the right order or whatever. And so I wanted to eliminate a lot of the, the risk in that. So that was a key thought there. A nice thing about once we decided, once we got into the DSL refactor was the TDD, the test-driven development was there, and so I could easily take my old tests and run them and make them pass, and I felt pretty good that I was working, and so that was wonderful to have in place. So here's just kind of an example of what the before looked like. So. But so we had the concept of being able to generate stuff, before a tag, after a tag, in the middle. There's lots of places where you could hook in that you'd want to generate things, and that, or you could replace the tag altogether and those kinds of things. But we would parse out the args, that were passed into the directive, and then we had optionally allowed you to quote some of them, and so then there was that going on, and then we had to pick up the HTML options, the WYSIWYG options, and then we had to build up, merge those in, and then build things up into ERB, and it was just, there's a lot of stuff there, and this is, just a simple thing. So I'm like, well, that's not going to work. So then the after with the DSL is much simpler. In fact, this is with Deb added in some metadata. 2 minutes, okay. So here we're just basically specifying the arguments. And then at the end, we're saying how we're building them up, and we're wrapping up a lot of the code that we normally we're doing. So I got the couple-minute warnings. I need to keep going here. And this was even a bigger when this collection select one was pretty complicated. But it takes a lot of arguments, and a lot of them are optional. So we had to take all that into account. But the DSL really cleaned things up, and it made it a lot easier. So you really couldn't do things wrong or forget things and all that. Let's see where I'm at. Admin tools to help testing, metadata so that you could change the namespace. Future directions. We're going to build a scaffold generator for REST. We need to get that community site up there so people can post their directives. The other cool thing that I'm really working on, and as soon as I get more time, next thing on my list is the more powerful directives. Right now we got the basic ones, but what I'd like to have is you can take a normal table and add in a simple directive, and boom, that thing becomes a pageable grid with sortable columns. And then also a similar version that uses AJAX. So then if your JavaScript is on, you can actually do things just with a simple tag. And I think we can do that. I've looked at the code, and I think that would be everything we need. Calendar widgets, address widgets, nav menus. A lot of the bigger component type things that you've seen in other systems, those are the kinds of things I like to do some simple examples. Themes. We'd like to do some non-evaluating things. Right now we use ERB, but we'd like to have some way to make it so you can change templates and not feel too worried about people executing this code. So if you're going to expose this to end users, that they can, that's going to work in a sandbox. And then I mentioned MERB, Nitro, and those things. I think there's no reason that we can't work well in those environments too. So that'll be something to be interesting. Of course, we'll wait for somebody that really needs those things before we do it. Like Gregory said, don't get into something that you're not specializing in. So anyway. core team is Deb Lewis and myself. Our site is masterview.org, and that's where you'll see documentation and installation instructions. Project is on RubyForge, MIT license, Ruby license. There's some mailing lists. I think we'll probably try and set up a track as well, but we're using the RubyForge versions of those things right now. My email's up there, and I'm probably out of time for questions, but you can see me later if you have any questions about things. And appreciate your time. And unless there's anything quick right now. I know I went pretty fast on some stuff, but I really love the Ruby community. It's just, it's been different than anything else I've been belonged to, and I think that's another reason why it's so exciting to be coding in Ruby. Just everybody's friendly and helpful, and you're not just a number. You're actually a face out there, and people know you, and they help you and all that. So yeah. Well, the question was about the version right now. I think is 0.3.2 or 3 or whatever. And so why are we down at that lower version? Well, I had read somewhere that people were incrementing the lowest one for this, and for major releases this, and I think it's a little bit different. So I think it was my interpretation of things. I wanted to make sure we had enough baked in there that it was rock solid before I went to 1. So that was kind of my thinking, but we're probably closer to 1 than 0.3. I mean, we're probably like 0.8 or 9 or somewhere up there. There really hasn't been a lot of bugs, with the community that's using it. So, plus the other thing I didn't mention is that since we're generating ERB, if there was ever a production issue, you can actually take that ERB and run it directly on a server without Masterview at all. So, I mean, if you want to work that way too, it's pretty safe to do that. You could generate stuff and move it over, and you don't even need Masterview. But yeah, so it's somewhere higher than that probably, if I remember right. Yeah.
Would it be a problem if some other design is working on another page and changes the header or the footer? How do you handle those conflicts, or one
right.
applies the other?
Yeah, I didn't want to have that conflict problem where if somebody changed the header and footer in one or changed the header and footer in another, that they'd be fighting for who's right. So that's why we didn't go with the last in approach. We actually said this one file is going to own the header and footer. This other file is going to own these pieces. And so if you change it in the other ones, it's not going to actually make it back over. It's imported, and if you do a refresh, it's going to build from the original. So there's only one file that owns each piece, and so you won't get into conflict things.
So you still need to know how the whole...
Yeah, and you can either control that in your own way that you specify you architect things, or if you generate, then there's a set way that it's set up. So, all right, thank you.